Assalamu alaikum all. Today I am going to be talking about building a tiny language learning habit. Now, I used to think that learning language was very difficult and something that I couldn't do. It's just going to be complicated. There's going to be a lot of time needed. You need to spend hours and hours studying. And when you look online, you do kind of see that. However, one of the best things I found was just to build a tiny learning a language habit. And when I say tiny, I mean really tiny, like even just 1 minute a day. Now, these are tips that I've sort of picked up throughout the years, reading a couple of books. One is Atomic Habits by James Clear, and another one is Tiny Habits, which is by BJ Fogg, who's like a professor or lecturer at Stanford University, I believe. And these two books are really good. And in this video, I explain why it's so important to build this tiny habit that will make a massive difference in terms of language learning. Now, on this channel, for those that are new here, I just like to say I share my journey learning languages as a Muslim and try and share the best tips that I found. Okay, so why do we need a tiny language learning habit? Now, one of the main reasons is just to get used to studying. Now, for me, I don't really study much. I'm working full time. If I need to pick up things, I kind of just, Google it, look online, read various different things and stuff like that. In my work, I'm a software developer, so it's all kind of related to coding and things like that. And that's quite fine, I could kind of do that. But I'm not used to learning and studying at home from a book and things like that. So, it took me a while to kind of get into that, And the thought of just trying to study 2 hours a day on a language, something I'm not used to doing, that could be very kind of difficult. So one of the books that I really liked was Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. And here it talks about making your habits as tiny as possible. So starting really, really small. And this kind of just makes it really easy to understand. You kind of get through that barrier of like, oh my gosh, how do I start? What do I do? Do I need to spend a lot of time? And just by spending that 1 minute makes a massive difference. So I've spoken before about using these Asimil books, and I've done a video about this. I'll make sure to have a link to this video below. And in these, they have lessons. Sometimes the lessons can take a bit of time to go through, especially as I'm getting later on into the lessons. But yeah, if I don't have much time or the energy is low, then I'll just spend 1 minute, maybe just doing one line. That's it. And it sounds really silly to do that, but the whole point of this is to kind of build the habit of sort of turning up and then scaling it up later. So this is just getting used to just getting into the habit of just opening the book, just taking a look and just kind of trying to do this kind of regularly. And then once I'm used to doing that, once I'm used to just opening the language learning book, just doing a little bit of language every day, I can then kind of increase that. So I might just do 1 minute a day for, I don't know, however long. And then, I'm not talking about just for 1-2 days. I'm talking about potentially weeks. And, just get used to opening the book, trying to study just a tiny bit. And then later on, I could think about scaling up to 15, 30 minutes or whatever it is. And sometimes I find once I have started, that's when I end up actually doing a bit more because I kind of feel more comfortable. I'm kind of in the mood, in the flow, but my expectation is very low, only just to do about 1 minute. That's about it, really. And what I really like about this, and one of the reasons I think why I have failed at picking up a language before, is it kind of reduces stress and anxiety when it comes to learning a language, because it just makes it a lot easier to start. Sometimes you can overthink things when it comes to learning a language, and it just kind of keeps me going because I'm just doing like 1 minute or a small amount. And and the thing is, I am learning each time, even though it might be a minute, a couple of minutes, or whatever it is. I am actually learning. I'm actually picking bits up. And and the thing about reducing stress and anxiety is that I want to reduce that as much as possible, because it's very easy to give up on the language, especially I would say initially when you're trying to get into the mode, you're trying to get your head around, what this language is about and things like that. So, it's very important not to make it too difficult to get into language learning and trying to do that regularly. And something I've spoken about before is the Goldilocks rule from Atomic Habits. So here he talks about, so James Clear, the author, talks about not making it too easy, otherwise you're not going to be kind of learning anything, but also not making it too difficult, so otherwise it's just going to be very hard to kind of get into, but just making it just right. And just having, that's a really kind of good rule to follow. However, I also kind of apply this another way, which is on some days, like when I'm just like very busy, or I've kind of just got low energy, family, work, things like that going on. And also it's been Ramadan recently as well, so my energy has been a bit low in terms of trying to get into language learning. I'm kind of fasting. I'm going to the mosque in the evenings. So that's why it's very important, like, that I need to, make sure I can do some sort of language learning. And, I don't have to always be like, oh, I have to do 2 hours of language learning or 1 hour language learning or even half an hour language learning, because even that can like feel like too much. So yeah, what I have done is I've kind of scaled things right back, my expectation very low. And, I'm just doing like 1 minute of language learning on some days. And, the most important thing is I just wanted to keep the chain going. So, I'm doing 1 minute a day. I'm learning a tiny bit, but I am doing this. I'm making progress every day. And in the Atomic Habits book, he talks about Seinfeld, which is like a comedian, very famous, famous, especially a while ago. And he talked about keeping the chain going. So what he would do was he would write a joke every day, and he would just sort of cross it off in the calendar. So that's the sort of tiny habit he has. Just write one joke. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, whatever, but just to keep the chain going. So what I really like about this tiny habit kind of process is that by doing a tiny habit, I'm keeping the chain going. I'm keeping my language learning going. So, I don't have to worry about doing a long study session every day. Some days I just do 1 minute. Some days, now that I've kind of got a bit used to it, some days I can do it a bit more. And yeah, it just feels great to keep the chain going. And some days I have missed it out as well. But, I always try my best to pick it back up the following day and, make sure I'm just trying to make some sort of progress. And again, this brings me on to like, progress is definitely greater than perfection. So, keeping progress going is the most important thing, because, before I know it, I've done, quite a few days of language learning. I've picked up little bits here and there, and that kind of really feels good. Whereas if I'm trying to make things perfect, that's just impossible. It cannot be done. And I'm less likely to kind of continue doing the language learning that I need to do. So, and I think what I like about this tiny habit process is that when you have a new language, like your brain needs to kind of get used to it. This whole could be different grammar, could be like, there's different words, just the sound of everything. So I'm kind of learning Arabic and French at the same time. They're two very kind of different languages, different alphabets, different kind of grammar rules, different sounding as well. So my brain needs to kind of get used to that. And, our brains, the way they work is they're kind of a bit like plasticine, and they kind of adjust to create, tunnels and connections and things like that. So it's important just to chuck stuff at it and keep the chain going. So, so my brain gets kind of used to these sort of languages. So yeah, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this learning about building a tiny language learning habit. And yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, got any benefit out of it, I would really appreciate you smashing that like button. If you're listening to this anywhere else, just really appreciate you just like maybe even leaving a comment as well. That'd be much appreciated. Assalamu alaikum.